And they had another 50 men or 40 or 50 men out on this freighting in the sawmill. But to get the number of people to have all this operation, they weren't enough at St. George. So they had to recruit out of places such as Cedar City, Virgin, Enoch, San Pete County, and Manti, well, even from Salt Lake, and even further north. People came down. They were encouraged to come down and spend the winter because of the mild climate, and there weren't too much going on in the harsh winters in Salt Lake in that area. Now, you might make note that the skill of these craftsmen didn't just come in building this temple. This was preceded by the earlier temples that was built in Kirtland, Ohio, on the Kirtland Temple, on the temple in Nauvoo, and they of course began to start the temple at Far West and set up a foundation in Independence, Missouri, but weren't permitted to do it. But they also had started and done some buildings in Salt Lake too prior to coming down here. So a lot of these people were skilled. In fact, a lot of the artisans in many of the things that they were doing had been skilled and trained in England before they ever came here. And so they taught the younger generations as they came on, and then by using these younger men as apprentices, these men became skilled operators in building in the various trades after the temples were built, which became very useful in building the community.
Brigham Young would come to St. George and to the southern settlements every year on an inspection tour to aid and assist in the various projects. Here in St. George, there were the special ones after 1863, the construction of the tabernacle, and after 1871, the construction of the temple. And Brigham Young did much of the supervision of those projects. From his own home here, after 1873, he could observe the construction of both the tabernacle and the temple. He also would spend the winters here because it was much milder, a much more pleasant climate. He had rheumatism in his later years, and he just felt better here. The temple project was a special object of Brigham Young. It was the first temple in Utah. It was based on the same floor plan as the Nauvoo Temple, and he wanted that one completed during his lifetime. It was important that they establish a telegraph line here, and so the telegraph line was run down here. Now, there wasn't a telegraph operation in this little office. It was down on Main Street. And yet it would permit Brigham to be in touch with Salt Lake and the rest of the world, for that matter. He wasn't the governor after 1857, but he was the real leader of the people in the territory of Utah. And every governor realized that, the Army officers realized that if it was Brigham Young that really was the real leader of the people here. Brigham Young almost refused to dedicate the St. George Temple because the steeple looked like a government building. He didn't like it. When they assured him that if the temple were dedicated, they would build the steeple higher like he had hoped they would. So they went ahead with the dedication on April 6, 1877. That was an interesting dedication because at the same time they held the general conference of the church in the assembly room of the St. George Temple. Brigham Young died August 29, 1877, and they hadn't changed the steeple. 14 months later, lightning struck that steeple and burned it down to the parapet. And then they built it the way Brigham wanted it. And everyone in St. George said Brigham had his way. Truman Angell was the architect of the Salt Lake Temple. He was also the architect of the St. George Temple and the Logan Temple. He also finished the Salt Lake Tabernacle. he gave credit exclusively to Brigham Young for the work of these magnificent buildings. In fact, when Brigham Young died, Truman Angell said, "The light to my drawing board has gone out."
The Honeymoon Trail was a trail that was dubbed the Honeymoon Trail because the St. George Temple was the only operating temple in the world and is now considered the oldest operating temple in the Mormon Church today in the world. But people wanting to be wished to be married for what they determined for time and all eternity, they had to go through certain ordinances in that temple, and they would, to do so, and they felt it very important to do so, they would travel several hundred miles, some of them from Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, northern Utah, and into Nevada and California, would come out into this area to be married for time and for all eternity. And so at great sacrifice and requiring sometimes as much as 3 or 4 months time, they would take to arrive here, probably in 2 or 3 companies of young couples wishing to get married, traveling together for protection against the Indians and for helping each other in case of breakdown and preparing food and so on. And but it was very significant to them and in their lives. It was very important for them to sacrifice that great distance and time to do this. The temple is a symbol of the faith of the people who came into this area. These people were living in wagons and tents and just beginning to build their homes and just getting started. Some people even in dugouts. And here they're building a beautiful structure that you see down there, a monument to the community and to future generations, to the children in the far-off future. They were out in the heat, they were in the cold, no trees, no lawns, no air conditioning. There were the dust, there was the flies, there were mosquitoes. And you can't believe the dust and when the wind would blow and what a mess it was around there and the noise going on. But these guys were happy with all that noise and the chiseling and the hammering and the rattling of the chains and the pounding of the cannon to put pounding the foundation in. And all those things were remarkable. They just loved it, and they were doing a great work. To me personally, it's a very sacred spot. And it's there for a very sacred purpose. It's not just a chapel. It's not just an ordinary church building. It is a sacred building for very sacred purposes with eternal consequences, and which will bind the family for not only in this life, but forever.
The tabernacle and the temple are buildings of unbelievable stature and sacrifice and quality. They're in excellent condition today. The amount of labor, the amount of rock, the amount of lumber, they could have built a temple so much easier than making this major statement. Tabernacle's the same way. But the statement says a couple of very important things. It says, we are not moving. We are going to be in the Great Basin. This is Zion. We are a temple-building people.
The main public works had been built, the courthouse, the social hall, the opera house, the tabernacle, and the temple. And they're all monuments to the ingenuity, to the dedication of all of those men and women who came down here to this desolate place and made it blossom as a rose. And there are beautiful roses in St. George now.
There are times when I stand on the mesa above St. George and look down and try to imagine that valley without trees and without streets and without buildings. Try to imagine what it would have been like when my great-great-grandfather walked into the valley for the first time. I try to imagine what they saw in their mind as they tried to envision what the temple would look like rising above the valley floor. I think through the trips to Mount Trumbull out on the Arizona Strip, 80 miles from St. George, to be able to find the ponderosa pine, to make this the type of building that they felt they could dedicate to their God. 7 days it took per load to be able to bring those back. They hauled lava rock for the foundation. They had sandstone for the walls. They wanted it to be white and pure, and so they created white plaster. This was an effort of monumental proportion. They gave the best they had, and the building that stands there today is not significantly different than what they built. It's a remarkable structure and from remarkable people. My grandfather took me one day into onto one of the upper floors while he was working there to show me some of the historic places. He showed me a place where Brigham Young had gone to study and to read. This is a building that is not just deeply significant from a spiritual standpoint, but from a historic standpoint. There is no structure in this state that has a greater historic importance than the St. George Temple.
People say that southern Utah, the Dixie Mission, was to grow cotton. And then they say, well, it's about the temple. But the Cotton Mission isn't about the Cotton Mission, and it isn't about the temple. It's about people and their faith and how they managed to serve on a mission, as difficult as it was, and still endure to the end.